Okay, we've started. Today what we're going to do is we're going to read the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra that starts on page 141 of volume 1 of the writings of Nichiren Daishonin. It's one of the first 3 goshos that we'll be doing in volume 7 when we receive them in April. Okay, this is the last meeting of February. So we're going to have 3 meetings, 1 today in February, 2 in March. And so what I'm going to try and do, because the first three gosho are the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra, letter to Horin. I maybe have them out of order, but the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra, letter to Horin, and Earthly Desires Are Enlightenment. Now we've already read Earthly Desires Are Enlightenment. I read it for Mr. Lee and made some commentaries based on the fact that there had not been a gosho lecture available on it. Okay, so I'm less concerned about getting that read, but I want to get all of the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra read. It's 14 pages, and then Letter of Horin is 20 pages. So I'm going to be reading this for a while tonight. I want to knock this one out so that we can do Horin in 2 weeks, and then when we go into April, the Gosho lectures from President Ikeda, we will have already read the full Gosho. The full Gosho will already be out there, yada, 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 right? Okay, so the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra. You can guess what that's pertaining to, right? We know about what Daimoku is, right? But I wanted to go over a couple of dictionary definitions for the sake of having them. And if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and get into that first. So the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra. What is the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra? Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. So let's one more time, as the Daishonin is going to break down Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Before he does it, let's get a preamble of what it actually is from the dictionary. Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, the ultimate law or truth of the universe according to Nichiren's teaching. Nichiren first taught the invocation of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo to a small group of people. Pardon me, this is from the Dictionary Buddhism, page 424. Okay, Nichiren first taught the invocation, and again, everybody that's listening, we've got a new puppy that is a little bit out of control sometimes. If you hear a dog barking in the background, I apologize. It'll probably be done. He'll stop that at some point in time. The ultimate law or truth of the Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, the ultimate law or truth of the universe according to Nichiren's teachings. Nichiren first taught the invocation of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo to a small group of people at Seichoji Temple in his native province of Awa, Japan, on the 28th day of the 4th month of 1253. Now, this Gosho lecture, this Gosho we're going to read, actually was written at Seichoji after he'd gone back. Okay, remember he went. This is after the Izu Peninsula and all that other stuff. He was visiting his mom in Awa. He was in the area. He went to Seichoji and hung for a few days and talked to. That's when the letter to the 2 priests that he did all that then. Okay, so, pardon me, small group of people at Seichoji Temple in his native province of Awa, Japan, on the 28th day of the 4th month of 1253. It literally means devotion to Myoho Renge-kyo. Myoho Renge-kyo is the Japanese reading of the Chinese title of the Lotus Sutra, which Nichiren regards as the sutra's essence. And appending nam, a phonetic change of namu, to that phrase indicates devotion to the title and essence of the Lotus Sutra. Nichiren identifies it with the universal law or principle implicit in the meaning of the sutra's text. So hidden in the depths of the 16th chapter, right? The meaning of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo is explained in the opening section of the record of the orally transmitted teachings. The record of Nichiren's lectures on the Lotus Sutra compiled by his disciple and successor Nikko. So this was written way before the OTT because he hasn't even been on Sado Island yet. Okay, he's been through the Izu Peninsula exile, but he hasn't been sent to Sado or Minobu or any of that stuff. The record of the lectures, Nikko, by his disciple and, The meaning of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo is explained in the opening section of the record of the orally transmitted teachings, the record of Nichiren's lectures on the Lotus Sutra, compiled by his disciple and successor Nikko. It states that Namu derives from the Sanskrit word namas and is indicated as devotion or dedicating one's life. What one should dedicate one's life to, he says, are the person and the law. The person signifies Shakyamuni, which means the eternal Buddha, and not the historic Shakyamuni. And the law is the Lotus Sutra, which means the ultimate truth, or Myoho Renge-kyo. According to the orally transmitted teachings, the act of devotion, the act of devotion has Namu has two aspects. One is to devote oneself to, or fuse one's life with, the eternal and unchanging truth. The other is that through this fusion of one's life with the ultimate truth, one simultaneously draws forth inexhaustible wisdom that functions in accordance with changing circumstances. That's what we do every day in front of the Gohonzon. Okay? All right. Orally transmitted teachings further states we may also know that the Nam of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo is a Sanskrit word, while Myoho Renge-kyo are Chinese words. Sanskrit and Chinese join in a single moment to form Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. If we express the title of the Lotus Sutra in Sanskrit, it would be Saddharma Pundarika Sutra. This is Myoho Renge-kyo in Sanskrit. If we express the title of the Lotus Sutra in Sanskrit, it will be Saddharma Pundarika Sutra. This is Myoho Renge-kyo. Sad, a phonetic change of sat, means myo, or wonderful. Dharma means ho, law or phenomena. Pundarika means renge, or lotus blossom. Sutra means kyo, or sutra. The 9 Chinese characters that represent the Sanskrit title are the Buddha bodies of the 9 honored ones. This expresses the idea that the 9 worlds are none other than the Buddha world, which we're all clued into, right? Myo stands for the Dharma nature, or enlightenment, while Ho represents darkness or ignorance. Together as Myoho, they express the idea that ignorance and the Dharma nature are a single entity, or one in essence. Ignorance and the Dharma nature are one. So this is that black and white is the same thing, as just a different side of it, right? Or one in essence. Renge stands for the 2 elements of cause and effect. Cause and effect are also a single entity. Kyo represents the words and voices of all living beings. A commentary says the voice carries out the work of the Buddha, and it is called Kyo. Kyo may be defined as that which is constant and unchanging in the 3 existences of past, present, and future. The Dharma realm is Myoho, the wonderful law. The Dharma realm is Renge, the lotus blossom. The Dharma realm is Kyo, the sutra. As Nichiren states, Namu derives from Sanskrit and Myoho Renge-kyo from Chinese. Nam-myoho Renge-kyo is therefore not simply a Japanese phrase, but a Japanese reading of a Sanskrit and Chinese phrase. In this sense, it contains aspects of the languages of the 3 countries in which Mahayana Buddhism spread. According to Nichiren's treatise, The Entity of the Mystic Law, Nanye and Tentai of China and Dingyo of Japan recited the invocation, meaning devotion to the Lotus Sutra of the wonderful law, or Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, as their private practice, but they did not spread this practice to others. On the 3 great secret laws, Nichiren states that the Daimoku Nichiren chants today in the latter day of the law is different from that of the previous ages, the Daimoku of Tentai and others Tentai and others chanted in the former and middle day of the law, because the practice of Daimoku in the latter day of the law involves chanting it oneself and reaching others to do so as well, teaching others to do so as well. Nichiren not only established the invocation Daimoku of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, but embodied it as a mandala, making it the object of devotion called Gohonzon. So there's no difference between the two, okay? In reply to Kyoho, he states, I, Nichiren, have inscribed my life in Sumi ink, so believe in the Gohonzon with your whole heart. The Buddha's will is the Lotus Sutra, but the soul of Nichiren is nothing other than Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. And then I also wanted to very quickly qualify mystic law, because we use that all the time it is Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, it's the mystic law. Mystic law, the Chinese Miao-fa, Japanese Myoho, the ultimate law, principle, or truth of life in the universe in Nichiren's teachings, the law of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. This term derives from Kumarajiva's Chinese translation of the Sanskrit word Siddharma, from the title of the Saddharma Pundarika Sutra, or the Lotus Sutra, in Sanskrit. It has been translated into English also as wonderful law, wonderful dharma, fine dharma, etc. In this dictionary, in accord with published translations, it is rendered as wonderful law when referring to the title of the Lotus Sutra, and as mystic law when referring to the underlying principle it represents in Nichiren's teachings, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. It says, see Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. We read that first. I'm not going to get into any more of that. I had a bunch of other stuff, but we're going to run out of time. Okay, Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra. This Gosho is on 141. I'll read the background first. It's a wonderful, wonderful Gosho. It's my honor to read it to you. Background. This letter was written in the first month of 1266 for a woman of advanced years. Nothing is known about her other than that she was a new believer in Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism and lived in Amatsu of Awa province. This letter explains in plain terms the rewards of the simple practice of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo by saying that this phrase and its components contain all the powers of the Buddha, and that one who chants it can tap all of the benefits of Buddhism and thus revitalize one's life. In the fall of 1264, 1 year after he had been pardoned from his exile in Izu, Nichiren Daishonin returned to his birthplace in Awa province. News of his mother's grave illness and the lessening of official pressures prompted his decision to return home. However, Tojo Kagenobu, the steward of the district and a passionate believer in the Nembutsu, was still incensed over the Daishonin's refutation of the Pure Land teachings 11 years earlier at Seichoji when he announced Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, right? That was the first time he preached about it, and was lying in wait for him. The Daishonin's primary concern was to visit his mother, and their reunion seems to have had a great effect upon her, and she quickly recovered. Kudo, Yoshitaka, and the other disciples in the area were anxious to see him and urged him to visit Kudo's manor. On the 11th day of the 11th month of 1264, accompanied by messengers sent to guide him, the group set out. When they reached a place known as Komatsubara, they were ambushed by Tojo Kagenobu and his Nembutsu followers, Amida. Kudo, who came rushing to the disciples' aid, and another disciple lost their lives. The Daishonin suffered a sword slash on his forehead and had his left hand broken. At considerable personal risk. You don't know about this? This is one of his 4 great persecutions, okay? Izu Peninsula, this, and Tatsunokuchi, obviously, and then the one that preceded, that came after this one. As, Sado Island, Tatsunokuchi, this, and Izu. Those are the 4. At considerable personal risk, the Daishonin remained in Awa from 1264 through 1267 and conducted vigorous propagation activities working with and among the people. In 1266, the Daishonin stayed for a while at his old temple, Seichoji, where he wrote several doctrinal treatises, including the present letter. This letter consists of 2 sections. In the first section, the Daishonin addresses the question of whether or not one can benefit from chanting the Daimoku, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, without understanding the meaning of the Lotus Sutra, and stresses the necessity of faith in attaining Buddhahood. Citing the examples of Maheke Shayapa and Shariputra, he states that even without understanding, one can eradicate any evil karma and accumulate boundless benefit as long as one carries out the practice of chanting the Daimoku with firm faith. The caveat's on there. It's not just chanting Daimoku. The caveat is you've got to have firm faith. In the second section, the Daishonin clarifies the great blessings contained in the 5 characters of Myoho Renge Kyo, the title of the Lotus Sutra. He explains 3 meanings of the character Myo: to open, to be fully endowed, and to revive. Finally, he states that only the Lotus Sutra enables women to attain Buddhahood, and urges the recipient of this letter to chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo and forsake her attachment to the Nimbutsu. At the beginning of this letter, the Daishonin calls himself a follower of the great teacher Konpon. Konpon means fundamental, is another name for the great teacher Dengyo. He was the founder of the Japanese Tendai school, which he based on the teachings of Tentai of China. He traveled to China to master Tentai's doctrines, and after returning to Japan, repudiated all the schools based on the Buddha's provisional teachings and devoted himself to propagating the Lotus Sutra. He also made the ordination platform in Mount Hei and consolidated all of the Mahayana schools. The phrase follower of the great teacher Konpon implies that the Daishonin is the legitimate successor to the Buddha's teaching contained in the Lotus Sutra. Okay? Going back then to page 141. Everybody's ready? Yes. All right. Page 141. The Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra, Nichiren, follower of the great teacher Konpon Dengyo. So what is he qualifying first and foremost? Write it in the title. In the subtitle. I'm not making this stuff up. All of this that I'm about to explain has already been in play for a very long time, but the fifth 500-year period had not yet arrived. Okay? And now I'm going to clarify what the correct understanding in the fifth 500-year period of the correct invocation is. All right? So you understand he's saying, I'm not making Nichiren, follower of the great teacher Dengyo. Okay, he's writing this in Japan to Japanese followers. They all know Dengyo very well. Okay, he's a historical famous figure in Japanese history, right? So he's qualifying. I'm not making this up myself in putting that there. Okay, he's also qualifying that he's a follower of the understanding that Dengyo adopted, which was the understanding of Tentai. Okay? Do you understand what I'm saying here? So again, he's basically qualifying the lineage of perception that Nam-myoho Renge-kyo is based on, and it's not something he pulled out of his buttocks. It's preceded all this time and been there without being ever qualified or revealed by anyone. So I'll continue with the Gosho. Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Question. He starts it with Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, all caps. Question. Is it possible without understanding the meaning of the Lotus Sutra but merely by chanting the 5 or 7 characters of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo once a day, once a month, or simply once a year, once a decade, or once in a lifetime, to avoid being drawn into trivial or serious acts of evil, to escape falling into the 4 evil paths, and instead to eventually reach the stage of non-regression? Yes, it is. Answer, yes, it is. Now, why is that answer, yes, it is? What have you done when you've chanted Daimoku even a single time? That's what he just qualified. That's what he was just said very cleverly, but that he's qualifying. Even if you only say it one time, you can avoid the evil paths. Why?
Faith?
Huh?
Because you with the faith.
Faith is the only way you're going to get there. But what is the process that you've established in the 6 stages of practice? You've gone from a Buddha in theory to hearing the name and the words of the truth in that process, right? That's exactly what you just did. You just opened the door. So what does Myo mean? To reveal, to open. That's what he's talking about. Nam-myoho Renge-kyo opens your existing original state, the original state, okay, and allows it to manifest and become real. You become a Buddha. You function as a Buddha. You have the powers of a Buddha. They're all available to you, but only if you open the door. You're the only one that can open your door. Okay? So he says, yes, it is. The Daishonin's answer. Question. You may talk about fire, but unless you put your hand in a flame, you will never burn yourself. You may say water, water, but unless you actually drink it, you will never satisfy your thirst. Then how? Just by chanting the Daimoku of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo without understanding what it means, can you escape from the evil paths of existence? Answer. They say that if you play the koto strung with a lion's sinews, then all the other kinds of strings will snap. And if you so much as hear the words pickled plum, your mouth will begin to water. Even in everyday life, there are such wonders. So how much greater are the wonders of the Lotus Sutra? We are told that parrots, simply by twittering the Four Noble Truths of the Hinayana teachings, were able to be reborn in heaven, and that men, simply by respecting the three treasures, were able to escape being swallowed by a huge fish. How much more effective, then, is the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra, which is the very heart of all the 80,000 sacred teachings of Buddhism and the eye of all the Buddhas? How can you doubt that by chanting it, you can escape from the four evil paths? And by the way, when you read this yourself, have your marker already back here to the little points of notes, because he's going to mention a bunch of stuff that is not really important for you to know, but he's going to mention for you to have clear understanding of what he's talking about. So, you know, when he talks about some of these different points, you can always go back, like the huge fish, the story of the huge fish. I remember the story of the huge fish, but I don't remember anything more than the story of the huge fish. They all saved themselves. All right? How much more effective then is the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra, which is the very heart of the 80,000 sacred teachings of Buddhism, the eye of all the Buddhas? How can you doubt that by chanting it, you can escape from the four evil paths? The Lotus Sutra, wherein the Buddha honestly discarded expedient means. Everybody's with me, right? You found where I kept reading. Okay. Expedient means says that one can gain entrance through faith alone. Okay, so the Lotus Sutra already qualifies discarding expedient means, discarding all the previous teachings up to the one that I'm now revealing for the first time. All right, and the Nirvana Sutra, which is also part of the perfect teaching, says, which the Buddha preached in the grove of sal trees on the last day of his life, states, although there are innumerable practices that lead to enlightenment, if one teaches faith, then that includes all those practices. Thus, faith is the basic requirement, last paragraph, second column, 141, for entering the way of the Buddha. Faith is the basic requirement for entering the way of the Buddha. In the 52 stages of Bodhisattva practice, the first 10 stages dealing with faith are basic, and the first of these 10 stages is that of arousing pure faith. Though lacking in knowledge of Buddhism, a person of faith, even if dull-witted, is to be reckoned as a person of correct views. But even though one has some knowledge of Buddhism, if one is without faith, then one is to be considered a slanderer and ekchantika, or person of incorrigible disbelief. The monk Shunakshatra observed the 250 precepts, mastered the 4 stages of meditation, and was versed in all the 12 divisions of the scriptures, while Devadatta memorized the 60,000 non-Buddhist teachings and the 80,000 Buddhist teachings, and could manifest 18 miraculous powers with his body. And yet it is said that these men, because they had knowledge but no faith, and yet it is said that these men, because they had knowledge but no faith, are now in the great citadel of the Avicii hell. So the bottom line he's clarifying, it isn't about what you know, it's how much faith you have when you embrace the object of devotion with the invocation of the Daimoku. Okay? So he's saying, Meheke Shayapa and Shariputra, on the other hand, lacked knowledge but had faith. And the Buddha accordingly predicted that they would become thus come ones, light bright and flower glow, respectively. They would attain Buddhahood. Not Devadatta or Shunakshatra. Okay? He says, the Buddha stated, if one should harbor doubt and fail to believe, one will fall at once into the evil paths. These words refer to those who have knowledge but are without faith. Okay, there are plenty of people that have knowledge but do not have faith. At the crucial moment, they doubt. okay? Or they don't perceive correctly from faith in the teaching what this is really all about in the first place, okay? Well, we're going to get into that. And yet, in the middle of the first column, page 142, and yet contemporary scholars ask, how is it possible, simply by chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo with faith, but no understanding, to avoid the evil paths? If we accept the words of the sutra, these scholars themselves can hardly avoid falling into the great citadel of the Avicii hell, because the sutra says you can. But the modern day scholars, he's saying, are trying to quibble about whether or not the sutra is correct, saying that that's impossible if you don't, because what is everything based on up until now? Until the invocation of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo has been revealed by the true Buddha, what has everything been based on? The knowledge of the sutras, the priesthood, the teachers that charge, give me alms. Okay, it hasn't been based on the individual being able to tap into the reality that already exists in their lives. Okay, and the reason that the teachers that exist at the time can't teach this is they don't know this teaching. This teaching has never existed prior to the original teacher manifesting in the 5th 500-year period, Nichiren. He says, and yet contemporary scholars ask, how is it possible, simply by chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo with faith, but no understanding, to avoid the evil paths? If we accept the words of the sutra, these scholars themselves can hardly avoid falling into the great citadel of the Avicii hell, because they're expressing a lack of faith in the teaching of the sutra. Do you understand? Okay. Thus, so Nichiren's not copping attitude about any of the stuff he's laying down right now. He's laying it down as the scholar of Buddhism that he is. Thus, as we have seen, even those who lack understanding, Chunda the blacksmith, whatever his name was, right? He couldn't even remember two words in a row or something like that. Again, thus, if even those who lack understanding, so long as they chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, can avoid the evil paths, those things that pull you in and separate you from the 10th world that exists in your life. This is the lotus flower. This is like the lotus flowers, which turn as the sun does. Though the lotus has no mind to direct it, or like the plantain that grows with the rumbling of thunder, though this plant has no ears to hear it. Now we are like the lotus or the plantain, and the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra is like the sun or the thunder. We're automatically attracted to it because it's the original state. It's the basis of our life and the existence of everything around us. People say that if you tie a piece of living rhinoceros horn to your body and enter the water will not come within 5 feet of you. They also say, these are a lot of colloquialism beliefs of the time, they also say that if one leaf of the sandalwood tree unfurls, it can eradicate the foul odor of the aranda trees for a distance of 40 yojanas. In this case, our evil karma, think of the, rather than weigh those two similes, think of what he's saying here. In this case, our evil karma may be likened to the aranda trees or the water, and the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra may be likened to the rhinoceros horn, which can keep the water from coming close to you by 5 feet, or the single leaf of the sandalwood eradicating the stinking smell of the aranda trees. He says, diamond, second column, page 142. Diamonds are so hard that almost no substance will cut them, and yet they can be cut by a sheep's horn or a turtle shell. The limbs of the Golda tree are so stout that the largest birds can perch on them without breaking them, and yet they are vulnerable to the tailor bird, which is so tiny it could almost build its nest on the eyelashes of a mosquito. Here our evil karma is analogous to the diamond or the Nagroda tree, and the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra to the sheep's horn or the tailor bird. Amber draws dust, and a magnet attracts iron particles. Here, our evil karma is like the dust or iron, and the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra is like the amber or the magnet. If we consider these analogies, we can see why we should always chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Does everybody understand what he was saying there? Okay, he's given two analogies of circumstances where something very large is actually vulnerable to something very small. Okay? And what he's qualifying is that the teachings may be large and the understanding to perceive them correctly may require great intellect, but if you compress it to its most basic circumstance, which is the title, the Daimoku, you can get the same effect as if you had the ability to master all of those teachings. He says the first volume of the Lotus Sutra states, throughout incalculable, innumerable kalpas, it is rare that one may hear this law. Okay, so just like we just talked about last time we were together with the one-eyed turtle and the floating log, okay, it's the same deal. It's very rare to even encounter the Daimoku, let alone to embrace faith in it. Okay? He says, and the fifth volume says, as for this Lotus Sutra, throughout the immeasurable numbers of lands, one cannot even hear its name. Now, we take it for granted because we have the Gohonzon, we've been chanting some, we've got the Soka Gakkai all over the world. It's very unusual even today, right now, compared to the rest of the population of the planet. There are very few of us that are aware of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo in comparison to the whole. He says, thus it is an extremely rare thing to hear the name of the Lotus Sutra. So you should always feel very fortunate. You should embrace the Gohonzon always with appreciation. All right? Though to even hear the name of the Lotus Sutra, though the Buddha's Sushanta and many treasures made their appearance in the world, they did not utter so much as the name of the Lotus Sutra. And though the thus come one Shakyamuni made his advent expressly for the purpose of preaching the Lotus Sutra, he kept the name of that sutra a secret and never referred to it for a period of 42 years. And when he keeps saying the name of that sutra, he's talking about Myoho Renge-kyo, right? That's the Lotus Sutra. Right? That's the difference we're talking about. When we're talking about Myoho Renge-kyo, we're talking about the Lotus Sutra, the 28 chapter sutra. We're not talking about Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Okay? Nam-myoho Renge-kyo is the invocation of the teaching of the Myoho Renge-kyo. All right? And though the thus come one Shakyamuni made his advent expressly for the purpose of preaching the Lotus Sutra, he kept the name of that sutra a secret and never referred to it for a period of 42 years, till the end of his life. It's the first time he mentioned the Lotus Sutra. Do you get it? Do you understand what he's saying there? In other words, why didn't Shakyamuni? What he's qualifying is that even though Shakyamuni knew about the Lotus Sutra, this was the purpose of his advent, he didn't mention it until the last section of his life. Okay, so it was not revealed until then. All right? It was only when he reached the age of 72 that he first began to intone Myoho Renge-kyo, the title of the sutra. However, the people of faraway countries such as China and Japan were unable to hear of it at that time. It was over 1,000 years before China heard so much as the name of the sutra, and another 350 or more years before it was heard in Japan. Thus, in first column, page 143, first paragraph, first full paragraph. Thus, encountering this sutra is as rare as the blossoming of the Udumbara flower, which occurs but once in 3,000 years, or the one-eyed turtle finding a floating piece of sandalwood, which happens only once in innumerable boundless kalpas. Suppose one were to place a needle in the earth, point up, and throw down tiny mustard seeds at it from the palace of the great King Brahme in the heavens. One could sooner impale a mustard seed on the point of a needle in this way than encounter the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra. I guess that qualifies the rarity. Do you understand what he just said? You could try to throw down mustard seeds from the heavens and make them hit a needle squarely enough to penetrate themselves on the needle. Okay, that's kind of like not going to happen, frankly. Okay, so he says, or suppose one were to place a needle upright on top of the Mount Sumeru in one world, and then standing atop the Mount Sumeru of another world on a very windy day were to try to cast a thread so that it reached the other mountain and passed through the eye of the needle. These are pretty convincing analogies of the rarity of encountering the Lotus Sutra. One could sooner, the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra, one could sooner thread a needle in this way than encounter the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra, he continues. Therefore, at the bottom of page 143, first column, therefore, when you chant the Daimoku of this sutra, you should be aware that it is a more joyful thing than for one who was born blind to gain sight and see one's father and mother, and a rarer thing than for a man who has been seized by a powerful enemy to be released and reunited with his wife and children. Question: what passages of proof can be cited to show that one should chant only the Daimoku? Answer: the 8th volume, page 143, first column, last paragraph. Answer: the 8th volume of the Lotus Sutra of the Wonderful Law, so Kumarajiva's translation, states that one who accepts and upholds the mere name of the Lotus Sutra will enjoy immeasurable good fortune. Now, this is the kind of stuff that he read and pondered, and this is where his interpretation of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo came from. It's from reading and knowing all of these things that have been said in all the sutras and putting 1 and 1 together and equals 2, and 2 and together and 4, and 3 and 3 is 6. That's how this all happened. And he's gone to more than one source, because now he's going to quote the Lotus Sutra of the Correct Law, which is not Kumarajiva's translation. This is the oldest known translation. He says, again, holds the mere name of the Lotus Sutra will enjoy immeasurable good fortune. The Lotus Sutra of the Correct Law says that if one hears this sutra and proclaims and embraces its title, one will enjoy merit beyond measure. So the actual sutra gave him the instruction on what to do. And the supplemented Lotus Sutra of the Wonderful Law, which is the third one, the youngest of the 3 old original texts of the Lotus Sutra. And I have all of this. That's where you see all those. I'm not going to do it all, but that's where all those pens are. All of these different points of what is this stuff. And the supplemented Lotus Sutra of the Wonderful Law says that one who accepts and upholds the name of the Lotus Sutra will enjoy immeasurable good fortune. So there's 3 original extant versions of the Lotus Sutra, all saying the same thing, saying that the title contains everything. Upholding the title is the same thing as upholding the sutra itself. Okay? He says, these statements indicate that the good fortune one receives simply from chanting the Daimoku, or title, is beyond measure. To accept, uphold, read, recite, take delight in, and protect all the 8 volumes and 28 chapters of the Lotus Sutra is called the comprehensive practice. Now, one might think that that's what we really should be doing, right? That's a comprehensive practice. To accept, uphold, and protect the expedient means chapter and the lifespan chapter is called the abbreviated practice. And simply to chant 1 4-phrase verse or the Daimoku, and to protect those who do so, is called the essential practice. The essential practice is just the title. Hence, among all these 3 kinds of practice, comprehensive, abbreviated, and essential, the Daimoku is defined as the essential practice. Question, middle of page 143, second column. How great are the blessings contained within the 5 characters of Myoho Renge-kyo? Answer, the great ocean contains all the numerous rivers that flow into it. The great earth contains all sentient and insentient beings. The wish-granting jewel is capable of showering down innumerable treasures. And the heavenly king Brahma rules over the 3-fold world. The 5 characters of Myoho Renge-kyo are comparable to these. all beings of the 9 worlds, as well as those in the worlds of the of Buddhahood. Pardon me? Did we say something? Excuse me. All beings of the 9 worlds, as well as those in the world of Buddhahood, are contained within them. I'll say it again. The 5 characters of Myoho Renge-kyo are comparable to these, which he's just qualified, the ocean where all the rivers flow, the analogies that he just gave. All beings of the 9 worlds, as well as those in the worlds of Buddhahood, are contained within them. So, enlightened or not enlightened, you're all contained within Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. And since all beings of the 10 worlds are contained within them, so are their environments. There's the basis of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life, right there. Okay? Let us first examine the fact that the 5 characters Myoho Renge-kyo contain within them all teachings. The single character Kyo, or Sutra, is the king of all sutras, and all other sutras are encompassed by it. The Buddha appeared in the world and over a period of 50 years preached 80,000 sacred teachings, and at that time the lifespan of human beings is said to have been 100 years. The Buddha passed away in the middle of the night on the 15th day of the 2nd month of the year with the cyclical sign Mizunoe Saru. Therefore, during some 90 days of summer, or the period from the 8th day of the 4th month until the 15th day of the 7th month of the same year, 1,000 arhats gathered at the compilation hall and set down all the sutras. After that, during the 1,000 years of the former day of the law, all these various sutras spread throughout the 5 regions of India, but they did not reach as far as China. It was only in the 15th year of the middle day of the law, 1,015 years after the Buddha's passing, that the Buddhist sutras were first introduced to China. This was in the year with the cyclical sign Hinoto U, the 10th year of the Yongping era, in the reign of Emperor Ming of the latter Han Dynasty. From that time until the year with the cyclical sign Kanoe Uma, the 18th year of the Kai Yuan era, in the reign of Emperor Xuanzong of the Tang Dynasty. A total of 176 translators went over to China, taking with them 1,076 sutras, works on discipline, and treatises comprising 5,048 volumes contained in 480 scroll cases. All of these sacred writings are followers. He goes into this whole preamble just to qualify that there is nothing outside of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. There's nothing in the lexicon of Buddhism that's outside of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. All of these sacred writings are followers of the single character Kyo of the Lotus Sutra, which would mean the teaching of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. That's what the Kyo of the Lotus Sutra is, isn't it? That's exactly what it is, isn't it? It's the latter day of the law. The Kyo of the Lotus Sutra is Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Do you understand?
Yes.
All right. Among the sutras that the Buddha preached during the more than 40 years before he expounded the Lotus Sutra, there is one called the Great and Vast Buddha Flower Garland Sutra. This sutra is preserved in the Dragon King's palace in 3 versions. The first version contains as many chapters as the dust particles of 10 major world systems. The second version contains 498,800 verses, and the third version contains 100,000 verses in 48 chapters. Outside of these 3 versions, only the smaller texts such as the 80 volume and 60 volume versions are preserved in China and Japan. In addition, there are the Hinayana Agama Sutras and the various Mahayana Sutras of the correct and equal and wisdom periods. Among the latter, the Sanskrit text of the Mahavrochana Sutra devotes a total of 3,500 verses simply to the explanation of the 5 characters of the mantra Avarahakla, whatever, to say nothing of the countless verses it uses to describe the seeds, august forms, and samayas of the various honored ones. In China, however, the text consists of a mere 66 or 7 volumes form. The Nirvana Sutra, which the Buddha preached in the Sal Grove on his last day, is preserved in China in a version that is only 40 volumes long. Though in this case, too, the Sanskrit versions of the text may have many more volumes. All these various sutras are followers. All these various sutras are followers of the Lotus Sutra. The Lotus Sutra is king among all the teachings, the most profound teaching of the thus come one Shakyamuni. In addition, all the sutras expounded by the 7 Buddhas of the past, the 1,000 Buddhas or the Buddhas of the countless kalpas ago, as well as all those expounded by the Buddhas presently living in the 10 directions, are followers of the single character Kyo of the Lotus Sutra. They're also followers of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. Thus, in the Medicine King chapter of the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha addresses Bodhisattva constellation King Flower, saying that just as the ocean is foremost among all the rivers, streams, and other bodies of water, just as Mount Sumeru is foremost among all the mountains, and just as the moon is foremost among the heavenly bodies, so the Lotus Sutra is likewise among all the sutras. The great teacher, continuing on page 145, Myolo says in his commentary that the Lotus Sutra is foremost among all the sutras preached in the past, now being preached, or to be preached in the future. With this single character, Kyo, are contained all the sutras in the worlds throughout the 10 directions, because this Kyo of the Lotus Sutra is Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, which is the original state. All right? That's why it's the basis of all the other sutras, even though they might have been preached prior to it being revealed. It is like the wish-granting jewel. God damn, is it or not? That's a perfect example. It is like the wish-granting jewel that contains within it all manner of treasures, or the vastness of space that encompasses all phenomena. And because this single character Kyo of Myoho Renge Kyo is the supreme achievement of the Buddha's lifetime of teaching, because this is the sutra, right? This is the teaching of him. The other 4 characters, Myoho Renge, likewise surpass all the other 80,000 doctrines that the Buddha taught. Everybody's with me, right? Coming now again, and do understand, he's saying this now at a time before Tatsunokuchi's happened, or Minobu has happened, or all those other goshos. The opening of the eyes has not been written yet. The object of devotion for observing the mind, the selection of time, none of those goshas have been written yet. All right? So he's not qualifying himself to be anything other than a messenger of the teaching that Dengyo was trying to convey. Because it's now the 5th 500-year period. It's time. All right? He says, coming in the middle of page 145, first column. Am I talking too fast? No. Okay. Coming now to the character Myo of the Lotus Sutra. The Lotus Sutra says, this sutra opens the gate of expedient means and shows the form of true reality. It allows you to take the teachings that have preceded Nichiren's advent and make sense of them so that they can actually have an influence on you again. Because they can't after the second 1,000 years is over. They lose all their power in the absence of the correct teaching being revealed. Do you understand? Coming now to the character Myo of the Lotus Sutra. The Lotus Sutra says, coming now to the character Myo, the Lotus Sutra says, this sutra opens the gate of expedient means and shows the form of true reality. The great teacher Chang'an states, Myo means to reveal the depths of the secret storehouse. What was in the depths of the secret storehouse? Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. It was buried implicitly in the 16th chapter of the Lotus Sutra. It's been around since Shakyamuni was alive. Do you get it? The great teacher Myolo says of this, to reveal means to open. Hence, the character Myo means to open. It's not to get, you don't acquire this. This is already there. You're opening to reveal it. That's the point. It's not outside of you. It's never been outside of you. This is the teaching that explains the true aspect of reality. Okay? Hence, the character myo means to open. If there is a storehouse full of treasures but no key, then it cannot be opened. And if it cannot be opened, then the treasures inside cannot be seen. The Buddha preached the Flower Garland Sutra, but he did not therein expound the key to open this sutra. So in other words, he's saying Nam-myoho Renge-kyo is what opens up all the other sutras now that we're in the fifth 500-year period. Likewise, in the more than 40 years that followed, he preached the sutras of the Gama, correct and equal, and wisdom periods, as well as the meditation sutra, but he did not reveal their meaning. Their doors remained closed, and therefore no one could understand these sutras. Even though people thought they understood, their understanding was in fact distorted. But then the Buddha preached the Lotus Sutra, and in this way opened the storehouse of the sutras. And for the first time in more than 40 years, all the people of the 9 worlds were able to view the treasures that lay within. To give you an analogy, even though there are people and animals, plants and trees on the earth, without the light of the sun or moon, even those with good eyes cannot make out their shapes and colors. It is when the sun or moon rises that one can discern for the first time what these things really look like. The sutras that preceded the Lotus Sutra were shrouded in the darkness of a long night, and the essential and theoretical teachings of the Lotus Sutra were like the sun and the moon. Among the bodhisattvas with their 2 good eyes, the cross-eyed people of the 2 vehicles, ordinary people with their blind eyes, or the ekchantikas who have been blind since birth, there were none who could make out the true color or shape of things by means of the earlier sutras. But when the Lotus Sutra was preached and the moon of the theoretical teaching came forth, first the bodhisattvas with their 2 good eyes gained enlightenment, and then the cross-eyed people of the 2 vehicles. Next, the blind eyes of the ordinary people were opened, and then even ekchantikas, who had been blind from birth, were able to establish a relationship with the Lotus Sutra that assured them that their eyes would one day open. Everybody's with me, right? Yes? Okay. All of this was due entirely to the virtue of the single character myo. There are 2 myo, or mystic principles, expounded in the Lotus Sutra. One is in the first 14 chapters, which constitute the theoretical teaching, and one in the latter 14 chapters, which constitute the essential teaching. From another point of view, there are 20 mystic principles, 10 in the theoretical teaching and 10 in the essential teaching. Or there are 60 mystic principles, 30 in the theoretical teaching and 30 in the essential teaching. From yet another point of view, 40 mystic principles may be discerned in each half of the Lotus Sutra. By adding these to the 40 mystic principles concerning the observation of the mind, the single character myo will be found to contain fully 120 myo, or mystic principles. Okay, now again, if you go to the back and you go through, you can even see him. I just got circles: 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. That will explain how we go from 2 to whatever he just went to, 10, 20, whatever, all of that. Okay, because those are all explanations of expansion that were given after the original sutra. Okay, but now he's going to qualify. Now he's going to give Nichiren's qualification of how many mystic principles there are in the Lotus Sutra. One fundamental myo, or mystic principle, underlies every one of the 69,384 characters that make up the Lotus Sutra. Now, I didn't add up all those other numbers that we just mentioned, but they don't come close to 69,000. Okay? Hence, the Lotus Sutra comprises a total of 69,384 mystic principles. He's saying, myo in India is rendered as sad, and in China as myo. Myo means to be fully endowed, which in turn has the meaning of full and perfect. Each word and each character of the Lotus Sutra contains within it, This is no different than the mutual possession of the 10 worlds. It says each word and each character of the Lotus Sutra contains within it all the 69,384 characters that compose the sutra. So they contain all the mystic principles of the entire sutra. Each character contains all the other characters. Okay? To illustrate, one drop of the great ocean contains within it the waters of all the various rivers that flow into the ocean. And a single wish-granting jewel, though no bigger than a mustard seed, is capable of showering down the treasures that one could wish for with all the wish-granting jewels. There's no separation. One wish-granting jewel will do the same thing as all the other wish-granting jewels. Do you understand? All right. You're big enough, you're good enough, your Nam-myoho Renge-kyo is all you need. Your Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, which comes from your life. Okay? Your Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, your original state, not somebody else's, yours. You only have to worry about your own. Okay? To give another analogy, plants and trees are withered and bare in autumn and winter, but when the sun of spring and summer shines on them, they put forth branches and leaves and then flowers and fruit. Before the preaching of the Lotus Sutra, the people in the 9 worlds were like plants and trees in autumn and winter. But when the single character of Myo, of the Lotus Sutra, shone on them like the spring and summer sun, then the flower of the aspiration for enlightenment blossomed, and the fruit of Buddhahood or rebirth in the Pure Land emerged. Bodhisattva Nagarjuna, in his treatise on the great perfection of wisdom, says, the Lotus Sutra is like a great physician who can change poison into medicine. This quotation occurs in a passage in Great Perfection of Wisdom that explains the virtues inherent in the character Myo of the Lotus Sutra. The great teacher Myola remarks, because it can cure what is thought to be incurable, it is called Myo or wonderful. In general, continuing page 146, second column, in general, there are 4 kinds of people who have great difficulty in attaining Buddhahood or rebirth in the Pure Land. First are those predestined for the 2 vehicles. Second are Ikchantikas. Third are those who cling to the doctrine of void. And fourth are those who slander the law. But through the Lotus Sutra, all these people are able to become Buddhas. That is why the Lotus Sutra is called Myo. Devadatta. These are examples of people that should never have been able to attain Buddhahood. Devadatta was the oldest son of King Drodadana and a nephew of King Shuddhodana, the father of the Buddha Shakyamuni, which made him the Buddha's cousin. He was also the elder brother of the Buddha's disciple, the Venerable Ananda. He was thus by no means a person of low station in the southern continent of Jampadvipa. He became a disciple of the monk Sudaya and entered the religious life. From the Venerable Ananda, he learned the 18 miraculous powers, and he committed to memory the 60,000 teachings of the non-Buddhist schools and the 80,000 teachings of Buddhism. He observed the 5 aesthetic practices and appeared almost more saintly than the Buddha himself. Thinking to make himself a leader like the Buddha, he dared to commit the crime of disrupting the Buddhist order by establishing his own ordination platform on Mount Gayashira Shirsha, and inviting the Buddha's disciples over to his side. He confided to Crown Prince Ajatashatru, I intend to kill the Buddha and become the new Buddha. You must kill your father, the king, Bimbisara, and become the new king in his place. After Crown Prince Ajatashatru had in fact killed his father, Devadatta kept watch on the Buddhist activities and with a large stone caused his blood to flow. He hit his toe. He also struck and killed the nun Upalavarna, who had reached the state of Arhat, which was his stepmother. Thus he committed fully 3 of the 5 cardinal sins. And by the way, he beat her to death. This says he just struck her. He beat her to death. In addition, with the Venerable Kokalika as his disciple and King Ajatashatru as his patron, Devadatta began to attract followers from everywhere until throughout the 5 regions of India, with its 16 great states, 500 middle-sized states, and 10,000 small states, every soul guilty of 1, 2, or 3 of the cardinal sins was a member of his group. They gathered about him as the various rivers gather in the great ocean, or as plants and trees gather on a great mountain. As the wise gathered around Shariputra, and those with transcendental powers flocked to Madhyayana, so did evil persons throw in their lot with Devadatta. As a result, the great earth, which is 168,000 yojanas thick and rests on a windy circle as hard as a diamond, nevertheless split open, plunging Devadatta alive into the great citadel of the hell of incessant suffering. His leading disciple, Kokalika, also fell into hell alive, as did the Brahman's daughter, Chincha, King Virudaka, and the monk Sunakshatra. Moreover, the people of India, with its 5 regions and 16 great states, 500 middle-sized states, and 10,000 small states, all observed this. Those in the 6 heavens of the world of desire and in the 4 meditation heavens, all beings in both the worlds of form and formlessness, including Brahma, Shakra, the devil king of the 6th heaven, and King Yama, likewise witnessed their fate. All the beings throughout the major world system of the worlds of the 10 directions heard about this and unanimously concluded that, even though as many kalpas should pass as there are dust particles in the land, Devadatta and the others could never escape from the great citadel of the hell of incessant suffering, and that though the stone that marks the duration of a kalpa might be worn completely away, they would continue to suffer in the Avicii hell. How astounding, then, that in the Devadatta chapter of the Lotus Sutra, Shakyamuni Buddha should reveal that Devadatta was his teacher in a past existence and should predict that he would attain enlightenment in the future as a thus come one called Heavenly King. If the sutras preached before the Lotus Sutra are true, then the Lotus Sutra must be an outrageous lie. But if the Lotus Sutra is true, then the previous sutras must be guilty of perpetrating the wildest deceptions because they're just expedient means. If Devadatta, who committed 3 of the 5 cardinal sins and in addition was guilty of countless other grave offenses, could become the thus come one heavenly king, then there can be no doubt that the other evildoers who committed only 1 or 2 of the cardinal sins will surely attain the way as well. For if the great earth itself could be overturned, then the plants and trees on it would as a matter of course be overturned. And if one can crush the hardest stone, then one can certainly bend the pliant grasses. Therefore, the Lotus Sutra is called Myo. If it can do all that, it can do anything. Coming now to the subject of women. This is totally cool because he says if you're female and you don't believe in the Lotus Sutra, you're stupid. Pardon me, you're ignorant. Coming now to the subject of women. And he's going to say a bunch of bad stuff about women because the other sutras all say bad stuff about women. So he's going to kind of like say that like, this is what the sutras say about you guys, females. Okay? But the Lotus Sutra doesn't. Okay? Coming now to the subject of women, we find that they are strongly condemned in both the Buddhist and non-Buddhist writings. The works known as the 3 records and the 5 canons of the 3 sovereigns and the 5 emperors of ancient China depict them as fawning and crooked. For this reason, disaster is said to have come about because the 3 women of antiquity, women of antiquity. Look it up on footnote 35. Thus, women are identified as the cause of the downfall of a nation and its people. The Flower Garland Sutra, the first, and again, I remind you that the reason that he's got to put all these little additional supplemental points of reference in is this is the beginning of his teaching. Okay, he's qualifying what I'm saying here. He's backing it up constantly, backing it up, backing it up, backing it up, backing it up. I'm not making anything up, he's saying, without saying those words. He's saying, thus women are identified as the cause of the downfall of a nation and its people. Last page 147, second column, last paragraph. The Flower Garland Sutra, the first great teaching that the Buddha preached following his enlightenment, states, women are messengers of hell who can destroy the seeds of Buddhahood. They may look like bodhisattvas, but at heart they are like yaksha demons. The Nirvana Sutra, that's what the Flower Garland Sutra says, okay? The Nirvana Sutra says the Buddha's last teaching that he delivered in the Grove of Saltry says all rivers and streams are invariably winding and devious, and all women are invariably fawning and crooked. It also says that if all the desires and delusions of all the men throughout the major world systems were lumped together, they would be no greater than the karmic impediment of one single woman. These are huge chastisements, girls. When the Flower Garland Sutra says that women can destroy the seeds of Buddha, and then you wonder why you had male-dominant societies at that time, okay? When the Flower Garland Sutra says that women can destroy the seeds of Buddhahood, it means that they scorch and burn the seeds that would otherwise allow them to become Buddhas. When clouds mass in the sky in a time of great drought and heavy rains fall to earth, then countless withered plants and trees everywhere will put forth blossoms and bear fruit. But this is not true of seeds that have been scorched. They will never sprout. Rather, the heavy rain makes them rot. Now the Buddha is like the masses of clouds. His teachings are like the heavy rain, and the withered plants and trees are like all living beings. When they are watered by the rain of the Buddha's teachings and observe the 5 precepts, the 10 good precepts, and the meditational practices, all of which bring merit, they will put forth blossoms and bear fruit. The scorched seeds that never sprout, even though the rain falls on them, but instead rot, are comparable to women who, though they encounter the Buddhist teachings, cannot free themselves from the sufferings of birth and death, but instead turn away from the truth of Buddhism and fall into the evil paths. This is what the sutra means when it says that women can destroy the seeds of Buddhahood. The passage in the Nirvana Sutra cited above says that just as all rivers and streams twist and wind, so too are women perverse and devious, because water is a pliant substance. When its path is blocked by some hard object, such as a rock or a mountain, it will split into 2 streams or turn aside, flowing now this way, now that. Women are the same. Their minds are soft and weak. Though they may believe that a certain course is right, if they come up against the strong will of a man and find their way blocked, then they will turn in some direction quite different from the one they originally intended. Again, though you may trace pictures on the surface of the water, nothing of what you have drawn will remain. Women are the same, for lack of steadfastness is their basic character. Hence, they will think a certain way at one moment and then a moment later have quite a different view. But the basic character of a Buddha is honesty and straightforwardness. Hence, women with their devious ways can never become Buddhas. Women are doomed to the 5 obstacles in the 3 types of obedience. Hence, the silver-colored woman sutra says that even if the eyes of the Buddha of the 3 existences were to fall to the ground, no woman could ever attain Buddhahood. Another old teaching. Great perfection of wisdom says that one could sooner catch the wind than grasp the mind of a woman. Yet, now this is where he comes back and says, but now it's the latter day of the law. Yet, though all female beings were so despised in the various sutras, last paragraph, 2nd column, page 148, he says, you guys owe it all to Myo. Though all female, we all owe it to Myo, by the way. Yet, though all female beings were so despised in the various sutras, when Bodhisattva Manjushri spoke the single character Myo, a woman was instantly able to become a Buddha. That's the Dragon King's daughter. Yet, though all female beings were so despised in the various sutras, when Bodhisattva Manjushri spoke the single character Myo, a woman was instantly able to become a Buddha. So extraordinary was this occurrence that Bodhisattva wisdom accumulated the foremost disciple of the Buddha many treasures of the world of treasure purity, and the venerable Shariputra, who was known among the thus come one Shakyamuni's disciples as the foremost in wisdom, protested. They said that, according to all the Mahayana and Hinayana sutras that the Buddha had preached in the previous 40 years and more, the Dragon King's daughter could not possibly become a Buddha. And yet in the end, their arguments were of no avail. And in fact, she did become a Buddha. If you remember that chapter, they all go, what the hell? That can't be. And he said, you weren't paying attention. Thus, The passage in the Buddha's first sutra declaring that women can destroy the seeds of Buddhahood, and that in his final sermon in the Sal Grove about how all rivers and streams are invariably winding and devious, were utterly contradicted. So in the Flower Garland Sutra and the Nirvana Sutra, they were utterly contradicted, and the views reflected in the Silver Colored Woman Sutra and the Great Perfection of Wisdom were proven to be nonsense. Wisdom accumulated in Shariputra were obliged to still their tongues and shut their mouths, while all the human and heavenly beings present at the great gathering where the Lotus Sutra was preached pressed their palms together in an excess of joy. All this was due entirely to the virtue of the single character, Myo. In this southern continent of Jampadvipa, there are 2,500 rivers, and every single one of them is winding. They are devious, like the minds of the women of Jampadvipa. And yet there is one river called the Sahaya, and that follows a course as straight as a taut rope, flowing directly into the Western Sea. A woman who has faith in the Lotus Sutra will be like this river, proceeding directly to the Pure Land in the West. See, he's using terms there he would not later in his teaching. Such is the virtue inherent in the single character Myo. Right now he's trying to substantiate Nam Myoho Renge-kyo for the sake of everybody that he's going to teach from this point on. Myo means to revive, that is, to return to life. For example, it is said that though the chick of a yellow crane may die, if the mother crane calls the name of Tsuan, then the dead chick will come back to life. Or in the case of the fish and shellfish that have been killed because of a poisonous bird called a chin has entered the water, it is said that if they are touched with a rhinoceros horn, they will all be brought back to life. Pardon me. Similarly, second column, page 149. Similarly, persons of the two vehicles, Ikchantikas and women, were described in the sutras that preceded the Lotus Sutra as having scorched and killed the seeds that would have allowed them to become Buddhas. But by holding fast to this single character Myo, they can revive these scorched seeds of Buddhahood. Tentai says the Ikchantikas, or persons of incorrigible disbelief, nevertheless have minds, and so it is still possible for them to attain Buddhahood. Tentai had the smarts to say that. But persons of the two vehicles have annihilated consciousness and therefore cannot arouse the mind that aspires to enlightenment. And yet, the Lotus Sutra can cure them, which is why it is called Myo, or wonderful. Myolo says the reason that the other sutras are called great but not Myo is simply that it is easy to cure those who have a mind, but difficult to cure those who are without a mind, because the Lotus Sutra, can cure what is thought to be incurable. It is called Myo, or wonderful. These passages refer to the fact that such sutras as the Great and Vast Buddha Flower Garland Sutra, the Great Collection Sutra, the Great Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, the Great Nirvana Sutra, all have the character great in their titles, but not the character Myo, or wonderful. This is because they can only cure the living, but are unable to cure the dead. The Lotus Sutra, however, can cure the dead as well as the living. Our mothers, our fathers, Grace, anyone we have the mind to think of, we're Buddhas. We reconnect them to our life. Our life is already connected to the Gohonzon. Okay? It may take them a while, but they'll always be part of our crew. They'll always be part of our crew until they become Buddhas, and they then become teachers. Do you understand? There's not a permanent identity between teacher and disciple. Disciples always become teachers. That's the reason they were disciples in the first place. The Lotus Sutra, however, can cure the dead as well as the living, and therefore it has the character Myo in its title, Myoho Renge-kyo. Thus, with the other sutras, persons, bottom of page 149, second column, last paragraph. Thus, with the other sutras, persons who should by rights become Buddhas cannot do so. But with the Lotus Sutra, even those who would ordinarily find it impossible to do so can attain Buddhahood, not to mention those for whom it is relatively easy. This being the case, in the time since the Lotus Sutra was preached, there ought not to be a single person who adheres to the other sutras. We're almost done. Now that the 2,000 years of the former and middle days of the law have passed and we have entered the latter day of the law, in such an age, it is top of page 150, first paragraph, it is 100,000, 10,000 million times more difficult for ordinary people to attain Buddhahood or rebirth in a pure land than it was for even the persons of the two vehicles or Chantikas who lived when the Buddha was alive. And yet people nowadays think that by relying on the Meditation Sutra or some other of the other sutras preached in the more than 40 years before the Lotus Sutra, they can escape the sufferings of birth and death. How futile, how utterly futile. Women, whether they live at the time of the Buddha or in the former, middle, or latter day of the law, cannot attain Buddhahood through any teaching other than any teaching but the Lotus Sutra. None of the other sutras expounded by any of the Buddhas anywhere can help them. None of the other sutras expounded by any of the Buddhas anywhere can help them. The great teacher Tentai Chi-Chi, who heard the Buddha's teachings at Eagle Peak and later attained an awakening in the place of meditation, has stated unequivocally, the other sutras only predict Buddhahood for men, but not for women. This sutra predicts Buddhahood for all. The thus come one Shakyamuni in the presence of many treasures Buddha and the Buddhas of the 10 directions preached the Lotus Sutra over a period of 8 years at the place called Eagle Peak, northeast of Rajagriha in the kingdom of Magadha. The great teacher Tentai Chi-Chi was present and heard him preach. During my 50 years of teaching, said the Buddha, I have preached various sacred doctrines, all in order to bring benefit to living beings. In the sutras of the first 42 years, I taught that it was not possible for women to attain Buddhahood. But now with the Lotus Sutra, I declare that women can become Buddhas. Northeast of Eagle Peak, at a distance of some 108,000 ri beyond the mountains and seas, there is a country called Mahachina in Sanskrit. I assume this must be China. We know it as China. Some 1,500 years after the Buddha's passing, there appeared in this country a messenger of the Buddha called the great teacher Tentai Chi-Chi, who described that women could never attain Buddhahood through any teaching other than the Lotus Sutra. 3,000 ri to the east of China, there is a country called Japan. Some 200 years after the great teacher Tentai passed away, he was reborn in this country and bore the name the great teacher Dengyo. He then wrote a work entitled The Outstanding Principle of the Lotus Sutra, in which he stated, neither teacher nor disciple need undergo countless kalpas of austere practice in order to attain Buddhahood. Through the power of the Lotus Sutra of the wonderful law, they can do so in their present form. Thus he made clear why the Dragon King's daughter was able to become a Buddha. And of course, Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, it comes from the title of the Lotus Sutra of the wonderful law, right? Thus he made clear why the Dragon King's daughter was able to become a Buddha. It may seem somewhat difficult for women at the age women of the age we live in to attain Buddhahood in their present form. But if they put their trust in the Lotus Sutra, there is no doubt that they will be reborn in the pure land of perfect bliss. They will reach it more readily than the rivers and streams flowing into the great ocean, or more swiftly than the rain falling from the sky. And again, this is an early teaching. And yet we find that the women throughout Japan do not chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Instead, they put their faith in works such as the 2-volume sutra or the Meditation Sutra, which can never lead women to the Pure Land or to Buddhahood, to a Buddha land. They intone the name of the Buddha Amida 60,000 or 100,000 times a day. Amida is indeed the name of a Buddha, and to invoke it would seem to be a laudable practice. But because the women who do so are relying upon sutras that can never lead women to Buddhahood or to rebirth in the Pure Land, they are in effect merely counting other people's riches. This comes about solely because they are led astray by evil teachers. All the women of Japan face an enemy more fearful than tigers or wolves, mountain bandits or pirates at sea, their parents' foes or their husbands' concubines. Their real enemies are those who, instead of teaching them the Lotus Sutra, teach them the Nimbutsu. Only after chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo 60,000, 100,000, or even 10 million times a day May women put forth their faith in the Lotus Sutra. If they still have some time to spare, now and then murmur to themselves the name of Amida or one of the other Buddhas. But women these days spend their whole lives constantly reciting the name of Amida and busying themselves with matters concerning the Nembutsu. They never recite the Lotus Sutra or give alms for its sake. True, there are a few who have the Lotus Sutra read by those who uphold its teachings, but they look up to the Nembutsu priests as though they were their parents or brothers and treat the upholders of the Lotus Sutra with less respect than they would their retainers or followers. And yet, they claim that they are believers in the Lotus Sutra. By contrast, Lady Pure Virtue gave permission for her sons, the two princes, to enter the Buddhist order and encouraged them to propagate the Lotus Sutra. Moreover, the Dragon King's daughter took a vow saying, "I unfold the doctrines of the great vehicle to rescue living beings from suffering." These women surely took no vow to practice only the teachings of the other sutras and to neglect the practice of the Lotus Sutra. Nevertheless, that is what women of today do, paying all their attention to the practice of other sutras and none to that of the Lotus Sutra. You must reform your thinking immediately. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And as I read the background, you know this was written to a female that they don't know much more about. And he's basically, this whole Gosho is telling her, drop all the other stuff and just chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And this is why that's okay. This is why this is what you should be doing now. That's what this Gosho has been about. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.